Welcome back to the Panel's Choice. Here we ask each panel member to pick a topic from this week that they feel is important to discuss. We'll start with Andrew's pick. Joe Biden has created a crisis on the border with his radical leftist policies, and many Americans are wondering, why doesn't he just reinstitute Trump's policies? Here's former Trump advisor Stephen Miller discussing their progress.
We spent 3 years fighting the ACLU, fighting radical left-wing judges, and fighting activist injunctions to ultimately put in place a program to end catch and release. Once we did that, once if you were apprehended, you were sent to either Mexico or a safe third country, pretty much all caravans stopped.
Andrew, why don't they just reinstitute Trump's policies?
Well, I'll tell you, first of all, Miller's just great. He's just fantastic on this. The reason why, the simple answer is because Joe Biden is too beholden to the radical left to be able to adopt any policies that pre-existed him, especially those that were authored by and sponsored by President Trump. But the truth is that they're already taking steps towards that. And it's because they're facing the Biden administration is facing a legal, political, and a humanitarian disaster on the southern border. And it's because of broken policy and frankly, a corrupt ideology. So Biden's DHS secretary came out this week and said that they're going to patch gaps in the
It's not a new wall, but they're just putting a new barrier up.
But I will tell you, though, that this is and this is something I've said before on this show, this is a harbinger of things to come. Stand by, and everyone should be aware of the fact that the Biden administration will inevitably start adopting Trump policies and then slapping the Biden label on it. Now, that's a good thing, but what it really speaks to is the fact that Republicans are on the right side of all these issues, yet we're still losing the debate because we cannot craft a coherent narrative nationally that is not only coherent but also compelling. And that has to do with fecklessness in our party at the top and cowardice, quite frankly.
Democrats are louder, but their policies are shown not to work quite quickly, actually.
Exactly.
But next we've got Derrick's pick. One of Derrick's initiatives is to reduce energy poverty, which occurs when people cannot afford electricity. Many utility companies are disconnecting the power of thousands of families during the pandemic. Most Americans who struggled before the pandemic with this issue will be impacted long after COVID-19 is over. Derrick, tell us about your initiative.
Yeah, one of the things that we work on the most is reducing energy poverty, which exists when individuals or families are unable to afford basic heating and electric needs. And many families who struggled prior to COVID to pay their electric bill most certainly will struggle after COVID. And right now, that's an example of electric companies right now going in and shutting off people's power during the middle of a pandemic. And so one of the things that I've testified before Congress 3 times before the House Natural Resources Committee about energy poverty and the millions of Americans who struggle each month to keep up with the rising cost of energy. And the solution to energy poverty is sensible energy policy, meaning, okay, we cannot rely on renewables. They just can't get the job done right now. And so as we transition to renewables, what we need to do is absolutely continue to utilize fossil fuels and natural gas, which is a gateway, if you will, to renewables.
So that's an interesting topic that I think a lot of Americans tend to not pay a lot of attention to, especially like folks watching the show obviously have electricity to watch the television. So can you give me some information or insight about how does that affect the greater economy? Because there are many people out there who are without electricity.
Well, right now, again, we need sensible energy policy. And right now, it looks like the Dems are doing everything in their power to shut down the oil and gas industry. As a matter of fact, I've been asked to give witness testimony next week before the Energy and Commerce Committee. And again, we're going to address this energy poverty. And this new phrase right now coming out of the Democrats is environmental justice. And it sounds really, really good until you pull back the covers and you look at what they're trying to do to the oil and gas industry, which is shut it down and which is going to be damaging to this economy and to this country.
Very interesting issue that I think not a lot of people are tracking. Thanks for raising it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Next, we've got John's pick. There's a new movie presenting the truth behind the Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision, including the involvement of Planned Parenthood founder Margaret Sanger and her motivation in supporting abortion rights. The movie raises questions not only about the integrity of Planned Parenthood, but the Supreme Court deliberations themselves.
And he was also mentored by Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood. Now here's the ugly truth. Margaret opened clinics in poor black neighborhoods and called it the Negro Project.
The mass of Negroes, particularly in the South, still breed carelessly and disastrously. The result, that the increase among Negroes, more than among whites, is that portion of the population least intelligent and fit.
Her goal was to reduce the black population, either through birth control or sterilization. She literally wanted to stop black people from having babies altogether.
Whew. John, tell us about your pick.
Well, actually, I chose that clip not to set your teeth on edge, but it was actually the shortest clip they sent about this movie, Roe v. Wade. This movie has just been released on streaming services. That's kind of the news hook here. But what it is it tells the untold story of the forces behind Roe v. Wade. One of the people behind Roe v. Wade was Margaret Sanger, who was one of the founders of Planned Parenthood. She's well known to have been a eugenicist, and she actually gave a speech to a meeting of the KKK, which is what this clip depicts. That actually happened. And I suspect the cross was an embellishment it is a movie after all.
Quite an effective embellishment.
It is an effective embellishment. But she actually did speak before a group of KKK folks, and her essential point was as depicted in that clip, essentially. And so saying that one of the reasons she supported abortion rights was, in essence, to suggest that some people should not be having children and other people should. So the movie talks about this being one element of the force behind Roe v. Wade. There are other elements too. For instance, a lot of bogus analysis and statistics which were propagated and got into mainstream media at the time.
That's still to some extent happening, because I was doing some research on this trying to figure out demographics, because you hear demographics thrown out all the time about this, and there is indication that minority communities tend to take advantage of these services more frequently than Caucasian communities. It's very difficult to find that information anymore, or at least I had a hard time finding it from a source that I thought was honest.
Well, it's not surprising, but you look at the statistics, and there do tend to be more abortion clinics in lower income neighborhoods, which tend to be African American.
Well, I think, one thing's for certain, Margaret Sanger was generally successful in her mission. When you take a look at really the only number you need to look at, these many years after slavery ended, and blacks are only 13.5% of the national population. How could that be? And when you take a look at it, it has everything to do with the destruction of the black family, as well as the actual murdering of children in the womb. Take a look at Roe v. Wade, 1973 opinion was passed. Since then, over 60 million Americans were murdered in the womb.
Yeah.
And now the same people who support abortion in Roe v. Wade are the same ones who are telling us we have to open the borders because we don't have enough Americans to do the job.
I know Derrick wants to say something, yeah.
A lot of times the Dems, they do a much better job with their messaging, okay? And we don't, as you talked about earlier. But Andrew, I'm so glad you brought this up. And as you alluded to just now, we are still 13% of this population. It's been that way for years. And I attribute it to abortion and black-on-black crime. In 2013, in New York City, in 13 and in 14, there were more black babies aborted than born. And if that's the model in New York City, it has to be the model around this country, which is why we can never grow our population. Every population in this country has grown except for the African-American population.
Wow. Fascinating. John, thank you for the topic. Lastly, we've got Amber's pick. The Arkansas legislature passed a bill banning transgender procedures for minors regardless of parental consent. The governor vetoed the bill, which the legislature then overrode the veto with a supermajority vote. Here's the governor's response.
As I said yesterday, I fully expected both the House and Senate to override the veto based upon the large majority that supported it initially.
Amber, what's your take?
It's pretty horrifying that we have a Republican governor who is apparently too spineless to stand up for protecting children. He actually went on Tucker Carlson and talked about this veto as well and claimed that he was worried about keeping limited government and actually called back to William F. Buckley and Ronald Reagan. And this is the same defense, actually, that Kristi Noem used when she vetoed a bill banning biological men from participating in women's sports. She called back to these unnamed constitutional scholars. And what these governors are telling us when they make these excuses for their fecklessness is, we know better than you do. You have to listen to us, or you have to listen to these calls to authority. Well, parents don't care about that. They want their children to be safe. They don't want them undergoing surgeries or hormone puberty blocking treatments that have horrific long-term effects, whether it's sterilization, poor growth, and a load of other issues for a thing that many children actually grow out of. And so when you look at what's happening, it's really just devastating that you can elect these people who claim to stand with you. They say they're going to sign a bill, and then at the last moment, they're too cowardly to actually do it, most of the time because of corporate interests, by the way.
That actually is a really interesting point. Can you go into that a little bit? I don't think people realize that.
Right. So Governor Hutchinson claimed that he had not talked to any corporate interests about this bill before he decided to veto it. However, on March 31st, he actually was talking to Rachel Campos-Duffy and said that corporations in the state of Arkansas were very concerned about the effects of this bill. So that was a lie. Kristi Noem also talked about how the NCAA would pull tournaments or other money-making events from South Dakota if she were to pass this bill about banning biological men from participating in women's sports. So it all comes down to the financial bottom line, and the question is, who is going to be brave enough to say that protecting children and making sure that children are not able to make life-altering decisions is more important than having a wrestling tournament in the state of South Dakota.
Right. Well, thankfully, the legislature overrode the governor, and the children have been protected. When we come back from the break, we'll look at this week's Don't Be Fooled and the closing argument. We'll be right back.